There's a reason coaches lose sleep when a position group that looked completely settled in July suddenly stops feeling settled in August. And that's exactly what's happening right now with the Raiders' defensive end room. 3 weeks ago, I would have told you this was the one part of the roster nobody needed to worry about. Maxx Crosby on one side, Malcolm Koonce coming off a breakout stretch on the other, and a front seven that finally had two legitimate problems for opposing tackles instead of just one. 2 preseason games later, I'm watching that same room and seeing something different. Not a disaster. Actually, maybe the opposite of a disaster, but definitely not what I expected walking into camp. Here's why this specific room matters more than almost any other position battle on this roster. Crosby is the kind of player who forces protection schemes to bend around him on nearly every meaningful snap. Extra tackle help, chip from the back, sometimes both. That's the tax opposing offenses pay just to keep him off the quarterback, which means whoever lines up across from him inherits a version of one-on-one football that most edge rushers in this league almost never see. Win that matchup with consistency, and suddenly, this defensive front becomes a genuine headache to game plan against. Lose it, and coordinators start sliding protection away from Crosby completely, daring the other side of the line to prove it deserves the attention. That's the stakes sitting underneath every rep I'm about to break down for you. Rewind to before the injury because context matters here. Across a 9-game stretch, Koonce's production was tracking right alongside Crosby's, and it wasn't matchup luck. The tape backed it up. He won with pure quickness, changing direction before the tackle even finished setting his feet. He could kick inside on one snap and bounce back outside on the next, stripping hands off his chest and finishing around the corner in the same series. That kind of positional versatility is rare, and honestly, it's why I thought this pairing had a ceiling most defenses around the league would envy, which is exactly what makes the last 2 weeks so strange to sit with. Through the first 2 preseason games, Koonce has logged somewhere around 26 or 27 snaps, and physically, he simply hasn't looked like that pre-injury version yet. I want to be careful with how I say this, because I'm not writing him off, and I'm not predicting some doomsday outcome for a player this talented. He's coming off a torn ACL, and for a guy whose entire game is built on burst and sudden change of direction, that recovery doesn't run on a schedule anyone can rush. But if I'm being straight with you about what the tape is showing right now, compared to before the injury, there's a gap, and it shows up specifically in the movement. The plant and explode burst that used to catch tackles flat-footed looks a step slower, a touch less violent. There was one rep where he tried spinning back to the inside, and it just didn't look like the player I remember watching a year ago. That's the hard part about grading someone through this kind of recovery. You're not just charting wins and losses on individual snaps. You're trying to figure out whether the engine underneath those wins actually survived the surgery, and right now, I can't fully answer yes to that. I've watched enough of these recoveries around the league to recognize the pattern, and I bring that up not to lower expectations, but because it changes how you should actually read what's happening on tape. Explosive edge rushers are consistently the slowest position group to look fully like themselves again after a torn ACL. And there's a real reason for that. Their entire game depends on the exact motion that puts the most stress on a repaired ligament. The plant, the redirect, the sudden angle change under contact from a 300-pound tackle. Straight line speed tends to return on a fairly predictable timeline. Lateral burst under load is a completely different animal, and it's often the very last piece to come back, sometimes not until well into a full regular season. So when I tell you Koonce doesn't look like himself yet, understand I'm not flagging something unique to him. I'm describing a checkpoint that a lot of players at his exact position have to pass through before the version everyone remembers shows back up on Sundays. I also want to be fair about who he's actually lining up against, because that context changes the read. Koonce has mostly been tested against starters and high-level backups in these joint sessions, which is a completely different bar than beating up on fourth stringers in garbage time. So this isn't about stacking his production against some other name on the depth chart. My real question is Koonce against Koonce. Does the get-off match what it used to be? Does the burst match what it used to be? Is he still the player who looked ready to form one of the scariest edge combinations in the league alongside Crosby? Right now, I can't say yes with full confidence. And given how early this recovery timeline still is, I think patience is genuinely the right call here. Now here's the part that changes everything about how worried you should actually be. A year ago, if Kunsei needed more time, this would have felt like a real hole in the defense. Right now, it feels like a manageable inconvenience, and that's because of what's happening behind him. Kwity Paye has quietly turned into the most dependable answer opposite Crosby, and he gives this staff something they can trust immediately, especially against the run. He's not going to rack up the sack totals of an elite pass rusher, but he sets the edge with real power and still brings enough juice on passing downs to matter. That blend of reliability and physicality is precisely what a coordinator wants available, while a talented piece like Kunsei continues working his way back. Las Vegas doesn't have to freeze the entire front, waiting on one player's recovery clock, and that alone changes the emotional temperature around this entire situation. Then there's Kieron Crawford, and this is where the depth conversation gets genuinely interesting. There have been fair questions about how much he's actually flashed so far, and I understand where that skepticism comes from. But underneath the surface, I like what I'm seeing. The traits show up before the technique does. The way he transfers from gap to gap. The length and speed combination that isn't common in a player his size. He's still raw. And honestly, that's completely expected for a rookie who didn't even start playing organized football until his senior year of high school. Tools always arrive before polish for developmental linemen. I think he ends up playing real snaps this season, somewhere in the 300 to 400 range. Not a starter's workload, but a legitimate rotational role that a staff trusts him to grow into. Patrick Johnson has also been solid, though I'll be honest, a good chunk of that production has come against backup level competition, which isn't the same bar Kunsei has been facing every single day. Even so, he's done enough to stay firmly in this conversation heading into final cuts. And a steady veteran who executes without drama is never a bad thing to have fighting for one of the last roster spots. Jafari Harvey is another name worth watching closely. He was here last year, and he's still here now, and that continuity tells you something on its own. He got an extended look in the most recent game and made the most of it. And Rob Leonard already coached him last season. That familiarity matters more than people give it credit for, especially in a scheme built on real terminology and technical demands. Coaches trust players they've already developed, and that trust can be the difference between sticking on the 53 and landing on someone else's practice squad. Then there's Cian Sloan, and honestly, this might be the storyline I find most compelling in that entire room. He's undrafted, and he plays like he knows it. The effort jumps off the screen immediately. The same relentless motor that earned him a rookie minicamp invite in the first place. And it's clearly translating into padded practice reps against real competition. His pass rush toolbox isn't complete yet. He's leaning heavily on a hesitation move and a cross chop because those are working for him right now. And he'll need more counters to become a fully rounded rusher at this level. But he's also held up as a run defender in joint sessions, which matters a great deal for a player whose calling card up to this point has mostly been getting after the quarterback. He still needs more strength, still needs more reps against NFL length, but here's the uncomfortable question this staff has to sit with. Can they actually afford to let him walk? Players like Johnson or Harvey, you can cut and revisit later, because their NFL mileage means no other team is sprinting to grab them off waivers. Sloan is different. Another coaching staff watches these exact flashes and decides they'd rather develop him themselves. And that turns a simple roster numbers decision into something far more uncomfortable. Step back for a second and think about how deliberately Rob Leonard has actually built this room, because I don't think any of this happened by accident. Deep competitive position groups don't assemble themselves in August. They get constructed over an entire offseason specifically. So a coordinator never has to bail out one struggling piece by overexposing another. What I'm watching right now looks exactly like that kind of insurance policy paying off in real time. Leonard isn't panicking about Kunsei's snap count because he doesn't have to. He's got a steady veteran holding down the fort, a rookie flashing traits the staff clearly values, and an undrafted find giving the entire room juice that nobody outside the building projected back in April. When a coordinator has that many answers stacked behind one uncertain piece, the uncertainty stops being a crisis and starts being a luxury problem. Those are two very different situations to be navigating 3 weeks before a season opener, which brings it back to Quincy himself. I still believe he makes this roster. I'm not sitting here predicting a release or a trade, but a month ago, I would have ruled both of those out entirely, and I can't do that anymore. Once you stack Crosby, a steady option beside him, a developmental rookie with real traits, and an undrafted rusher forcing the staff's hand, every single spot in that room suddenly carries actual weight. If this staff genuinely believes Quincy just needs more time, keeping him makes complete sense given the money and draft capital already committed before the injury. But if these younger players keep backing up their flashes with production over these final preseason snaps, that conversation gets uncomfortable fast. Because roster decisions in this league stop waiting on sentiment the moment the tape stops supporting it. Now let me pull you into the moment that actually stopped that entire building cold. Because this is the update everyone's been waiting to hear. When Ashton Jeanty went down at practice, it did not look like a normal training camp moment. He dove for a low throw from Kirk Cousins, landed awkwardly, and couldn't put any weight on the leg. He needed help just to get off the field. His teammates dropped to a knee around him without anyone telling them to. When you watch a player unable to walk off under his own power, your mind goes straight to the outcomes nobody wants to say out loud. And for a few minutes, that entire facility went silent. The update that came out afterward is a lot better than that scene suggested in real time. Jeanty is believed to have sprained his ankle, not torn anything structural. There's still no firm timeline attached to his return, but this is not being treated as a long-term situation. Given how frightening that moment looked live, that's about as close to a best-case outcome as this could have produced. And with roughly 3 weeks left before the regular season opener, there's real runway here for him to rest, rehab, and get back to full speed before games actually start counting. But here's why this isn't a throwaway update, even with the encouraging news. If Jeanty ends up missing any real stretch of time, that backfield picture gets a lot more interesting immediately. Mike Washington has shown legitimate juice this preseason, and I like plenty of what I've seen from him, but he's still young in a role that demands far more than making a defender miss in open space. Pass protection assignments, blitz pickup, all the smaller responsibilities that decide whether a young back actually earns extended snaps, especially with a rookie quarterback room still finding its footing behind that same offensive line. That's exactly why genuine veteran presence in that backfield matters as much as it does right now. It was never just about who produces the flashiest run in a meaningless August rep. It's about who this staff can trust with every single assignment that comes with real playing time once the games start counting for real. So here's what I'm actually tracking from this point forward. How Quincy looks the very next time he gets a real opportunity to build on these first 2 weeks. Whether Sloan and Crawford keep forcing this staff's hand the way they have so far. And how Las Vegas ultimately sorts through both the defensive end room and the backfield once actual roster decisions come down. Based on everything I've watched through 2 preseason games, this situation has turned into something far more layered than I expected walking into camp. For most coaching staffs around this league, that kind of complexity would be a stressful problem to manage. For this one, I think it might end up being exactly the kind of problem you actually want to have 3 weeks before the season opens.